It all started a few months ago when my wife, Laura, came to me with what she thought was a brilliant idea. Claire and some of the women in our political group think we should volunteer for Senator Blake's re-election campaign, she said, her tone carrying that overly cheery edge I knew too well. I shot her a look. We? Who's this we you're talking about? You and me? She nodded, her enthusiasm unwavering. Exactly. It'll be fun. Something different for a change. I leaned forward, already sensing there was more to this than she was letting on. What does this something different entail? Who else is signing up for this? Or is it just your bright idea? She hesitated, clearly not expecting me to push back. Well, no one else in the group seems interested. But from what I've heard, we'd be donating as much time as we can until the election. It might mean traveling around the state, helping with fundraising, or whatever else they need. I crossed my arms. Traveling around the state? That's convenient for you, isn't it? What am I supposed to do about my job? Unlike you, I can't just drop everything. Her expression hardened, and she shot back without missing a beat. You've got what, 20 weeks of unused vacation time? Take some of it and come with me. It won't kill you. I didn't appreciate the tone, but I let it slide for now. This was so far out of character for her that it set off alarm bells. In the 22 years we'd been married, Laura had never suggested anything remotely adventurous, and now she wanted to hit the campaign trail like we were carefree college kids? Something wasn't adding up. All right, Laura, I said sharply, refusing to sugarcoat my doubts. Before I even consider this, you're going to give me answers. Who's paying for what? Are we covering our own meals? What's the dress code? I'm not signing up for anything blind. Her face tightened, but she nodded. She wasn't thrilled I was grilling her, but I didn't care. When the details came back, I wasn't impressed. The costs were higher than I expected, but I could afford them. That didn't make it any less irritating. At the same time, I had my own work situation to handle. My colleague, Madeline Carter, was temporarily stepping into my role. Madeline and I started at the company on the same day years ago. While her career had slowed after she took maternity leave, mine hadn't, and she'd been reporting to me for the last 4 years. Madeline had a reputation for being sharp and dedicated, but she also had a way of joking that rubbed me the wrong way. Whenever we were alone, she'd throw out remarks like, "You're my next ex," as if that was something I wanted to hear. I brushed it off, but my wife, Laura, wasn't so forgiving. Laura didn't trust Madeline, not one bit. In fact, she went out of her way to invite her to every block party and neighborhood event just to monitor our interactions. It was her way of keeping tabs, but it didn't bother me. There was nothing to hide. Meanwhile, Laura spent her days flitting from one volunteer gig to another. After years as a stay-at-home mom, she wasn't exactly equipped for today's job market, so this political campaign was her latest important cause. I didn't buy into it, but I let her do her thing. When I told Madeline about my leave, her response was typical. "Hey, Ethan," she grinned. "Looks like I get to be you for a while. 10 weeks, huh? Don't worry. I'll try not to burn it all down." I didn't smile. "Just do your job. If anyone gives you trouble, you'll handle it. And if not, I'm one call away." Her smirk faltered, but she nodded. I wasn't in the mood for banter. With that sorted, Laura and I joined the campaign trail. It wasn't exactly glamorous. We were one of only 3 older couples in a sea of bright-eyed college kids. On the Wednesday before the first big fundraising event, we met Senator Blake in person. I'd seen him plenty of times on TV, but seeing him up close was, well, just another part of this increasingly strange situation Laura had dragged me into. Meeting Senator Blake in person didn't change my opinion of him. If anything, it solidified what I already suspected. He was all show, no substance. Laura, on the other hand, acted like a starstruck teenager at a boy band concert. It was embarrassing to watch. Blake strutted into the room as if he owned it, shorter than most men at about 5 feet 8 inches and easily over 200 pounds. His labored breathing suggested fitness wasn't high on his agenda. What really got under my skin, though, was his behavior with the volunteers. He barely acknowledged the men, dismissing them with a curt nod, but he couldn't keep his hands off the women. Hugging them, touching their arms and backs, even planting kisses on foreheads and cheeks, it was sleazy, plain, and simple. I pulled Laura aside after watching her giggle like a schoolgirl when he patted her shoulder. "Laura, watch yourself around him," I said coldly. I don't like how he's all over the women. She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. Oh, please. He's just a friendly, outgoing guy. Get a grip, Ethan. I didn't respond. There was no point arguing with her when she got like this, but her dismissive attitude grated on me. The days blurred together as we slogged through mind-numbing tasks, making phone calls, assembling posters, running errands. It didn't take a genius to figure out that most of the work required little more than a functioning pair of hands. I found myself stuck with tedious jobs like picking up supplies, super glue, duct tape, poster boards, staples. One afternoon, I accidentally glued my fingers together with the industrial-strength adhesive we were using. It took days of painful trial and error to separate them, leaving my skin raw and peeling. The injuries were a constant reminder of how ridiculous this whole campaign was. Meanwhile, the waste was staggering. Expensive materials were used to create displays that lasted only hours before being trashed. Between Laura's endless smoothie runs and the campaign's frivolous spending, I was fed up. And then there was Blake himself. His stump speech was as repetitive as it was hollow. I've got a plan. I'm going to stick to it. And I'm going to stick it to Washington. The man had been in office for 2 terms and had accomplished nothing of substance. If his opponent weren't just as slimy, I would have quit this farce already. Our home life wasn't faring any better. The long hours and constant driving left us exhausted. An intimacy between Laura and me had ground to a halt. Instead of addressing the growing distance, Laura poured all her energy into updating her Facebook page with pictures of herself and Blake at every event. Every photo told the same story. Blake with his hand on her shoulder, her waist, or worse. I couldn't tell if she was starstruck or something more, but either way, it wasn't sitting right with me. One night, after another failed attempt to break our now lengthy celibate streak, I confronted her. Laura, what's going on with you? You're hanging on Blake's every word and acting like his personal cheerleader. Do I need to be worried about the two of you? She spun around, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger. Are you seriously accusing me of something? You're jealous, aren't you? Admit it. You can't handle that he's successful, powerful, and important. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her bait me. He's also married. Or did that conveniently slip your mind? She huffed, storming out of the room and slamming the bedroom door. It was becoming a pattern. Any time I challenged her behavior, she'd throw a tantrum instead of addressing the issue. The next day, I suggested we quit the campaign and go home. Predictably, that sparked another shouting match. She was too invested in this nonsense, and I was too tired to keep fighting her on it. With just 2 weeks left until the election, the tension was unbearable. Blake was barely leading in the polls, and the pressure was mounting. Every volunteer was stretched thin, and I was starting to wonder if any of this was even worth it. One evening, 3 hours from home, I was running yet another errand, picking up brochures for a fundraising dinner. My hands were full when I returned to the ballroom, and I hadn't seen Laura yet. You're Ethan, right? A voice said behind me. I turned to find a man holding a manila folder. He had a no-nonsense demeanor that instantly put me on edge. That's me, I said cautiously. What can I do for you? Call me James, he said. I'm an investigator working for some people who'd like to see Senator Blake lose this election. I have some things you might find interesting. I glanced around, unsure if this was a joke or something more serious. I'm listening, I said, my tone sharp. But this better be worth my time. James didn't waste any time. Walk with me, he said, motioning toward the hotel lobby. As we moved away from the crowd, the pit in my stomach grew. Then he said it. Your wife and Senator Blake are having an affair. 9 times over the past 4 weeks, she's joined him in his suite right before fundraising dinners. There are pictures in this folder that show her coming and going. I even have photos from today's encounter. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Prove it. James opened his phone and swiped through a series of images. This afternoon, she left the suite about 10 minutes ago. He left first, while she stayed back to shower. I took these just a short while ago. I forced myself to look. My hands balled into fists as I saw the damning images. Laura entering Blake's room, the two of them together, her disheveled exit. My mind raced, trying to find an excuse, a reason, something to cling to. James handed me the folder. There's more in here. Twice, we were able to photograph their interactions. If you don't believe me, check for yourself. I flipped it open, only to slam it shut after a quick glance. My marriage was over. I didn't need to burn these images into my memory to know it. How do I know these aren't staged? I asked, though my voice betrayed my doubt. James smirked knowingly. You don't. But here's a detail for you. He's got a unique habit. He bites women on their backside. Check tonight if you don't believe me. She'll have the mark. My stomach turned. James continued. Here's his routine. He slips her his room key, which she tucks into her sweater pocket. Then she finds you and sends you on a wild goose chase. By the time you're back, she's cleaned up and acting like nothing happened. Check the receipts for the errands she sends you on. You'll find there's time to give her just enough time to finish up. I thought back to the brochures I had just picked up. The receipt in my pocket confirmed they'd been ready since the morning, yet I hadn't been told to fetch them until late in the afternoon. It all added up, and the realization hit me like a freight train. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my tone ice cold. James didn't flinch. Because you're not the type to let this slide. Of all the women Blake is screwing around with, your wife was the easiest to track. But we believe you'll make the biggest impact. You have the backbone to make a scene, and we'd like to see it happen. I didn't respond immediately. The rage simmering inside me made it hard to focus. James took out an envelope and handed it to me. Here's $10,000. Consider it compensation for emotional distress. There's also a card for one of our attorneys. He's ready to represent you pro bono if you decide to go nuclear. I took the envelope, weighing it in my hand. My jaw clenched as I opened it, confirming it was filled with cash. Not tonight, I said, my voice low but firm. But soon. You can count on that. James smiled, patting me on the back. Good man. As he walked away, I went straight to my car. I locked the cash and folder in the trunk, keeping only the attorney's card. No longer was I interested in returning to the ballroom. Instead, I sat in my car, my thoughts consumed with fury and betrayal. After staring at the attorney's card for what felt like hours, I dialed the number. The call was answered by a man named Grant, who listened intently as I laid out the situation. Grant didn't mince words. If you decide to go for revenge and it crosses into illegal territory, call me first. Don't do anything rash. Understood, I said curtly. But trust me, I'm not the type to let this go. Good, he said. Blake's a powerful man. He'll fight dirty, so be prepared. I ended the call and spent the next few hours cycling through 100 different ideas for revenge. Each one was more elaborate than the last, but I knew I needed to bide my time. This wasn't going to end quietly. When I finally returned to the hotel, Laura was waiting for me in the lobby, her face twisted in mock concern. Where have you been? Why aren't you answering your phone? I was worried sick. I kept my composure, my voice cold. I wasn't feeling well. Misplaced my phone. Let's go. We still need to help clean up, she said, annoyed. I'm leaving. Come with me, or find your own way back. Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She huffed, turning away to collect her things. I left without looking back, driving the 3 miles to our motel. The drive gave me time to let my anger settle into something sharper, more focused. She had no idea what was coming, but I had warned her once. Whatever happened next, she'd earned every bit of it. The rage simmered overnight, transforming into a cold, calculating resolve. Revenge wouldn't just be for Laura. It would be for her sleazy lover, too. If I could tank Henrik's election chances and expose Laura for the unfaithful, conniving woman she had become, so much the better. Laura stumbled back into the motel 2 hours later, reeking of alcohol. Her cheeks were flushed, and her words slurred as she muttered something about being tired. I didn't respond. I didn't care. She could do what she wanted. She wasn't my wife anymore in my eyes. Morning came, and I was up and dressed before she even stirred. We were heading home for 2 days before the next event, but I wasn't about to play the doting husband anymore. Laura, still in her nightgown and panties, stirred lazily when I pulled back the covers. I yanked her panties down, and she jolted awake, glaring at me. "What the hell are you doing?" she snapped, her voice groggy and sharp. "After the way you acted yesterday, You're not getting any of this." I didn't answer her accusations. I wasn't interested in her twisted logic or her excuses. My eyes scanned her body until they landed on what I was looking for: bite marks, several of them, on her backside. My heart didn't sink. It didn't ache. It hardened. "We're done," I said, my voice cold and emotionless. "I'm leaving for home in 15 minutes, with or without you." Laura's face contorted with anger as she leapt out of bed, muttering curses under her breath. She rushed to the shower, and I heard the sound of water running as she yelled obscenities at me from behind the bathroom door. The 3-hour drive home was a cacophony of profanity and accusations from Laura. She ranted about how I didn't understand Henrik's greatness and accused me of being petty and jealous. "It's so cute how you think I'm listening," I said flatly, staring at the road ahead. She didn't stop, her tirade laced with profanities that only made me grip the steering wheel tighter. I resisted the urge to pull over, open her door, and shove her out. Instead, I drove in silence, letting her words fade into background noise. Back home, I wasted no time distancing myself from her. Even our dog, Sausage, seemed lethargic in her presence. Taking him to the vet was more about escaping her than genuine concern, though the antibiotics he received were needed. At the vet's office, I noticed a bottle of chloroform on the counter. An idea sparked, dark and sinister, and I pocketed the bottle. If Laura and Henrik wanted to play dirty, I'd show them just how far I was willing to go. Over the next 2 days, I acted as normal as possible, despite the silent dinners and cold shoulders. I even snuck off to get tested for STDs. Not because I cared about her anymore, but because I refused to let her betrayal ruin me further. The drive to the next event was icy. Laura barely spoke, except to demand bathroom stops, which I grudgingly complied with. Her smugness boiled over when Henrik came up in conversation. "You just don't understand what a great statesman Henrik is," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I'm sure his statesmanship is exactly what you're interested in. Let me guess, he's such a gentleman that you can't help yourself." She scowled. "You're pathetic. He's a leader, something you'll never be. You're just jealous." I didn't reply. There was no need. At 3 p.m., I handed Laura the smoothie she demanded earlier. What she didn't know was that I'd spiked it with a hefty dose of laxatives. I wanted her uncomfortable and off balance. Anything to keep her from noticing the plan I was setting into motion. Just as James had described, Henrik slipped her a hotel room key at 4 p.m., which she tucked into her sweater pocket before heading over to me. Her usual routine played out like clockwork. She sent me on an errand to pick up brochures. This time, though, I wasn't her clueless pawn. I waited until she was distracted, then took the key card from her pocket. Written on it in ink was the room number, 321. I slipped into the men's room to change into my disguise, complete with a baggy shirt to hide the duffel bag of supplies I'd brought. I lingered in the stairwell near the 3rd floor, pretending to be on a phone call, until I saw Henrik enter the room. A minute later, Laura emerged from the elevator, frantically patting her sweater. She knocked on the door, and Henrik pulled her inside, jerking her arm roughly. I gave them a minute before slipping the key card into the lock. The light turned green, and I entered quietly. What I saw would haunt most men, but not me. My wife, no. That woman was on all fours, her sagging body moving to Henrik's rhythm. He hadn't even bothered to take off his socks. I moved swiftly, soaking a rag with chloroform and pressing it over Henrik's face. He struggled briefly, landing an elbow in my ribs, but it didn't take long for him to slump to the floor. Laura, her face buried in the pillow, didn't even notice. No, don't stop," she moaned. She stopped soon enough when I did the same to her, rendering her unconscious. What happened next wasn't for the faint of heart. I worked meticulously, using the super glue I'd packed to enact my revenge. By the time I was done, Henrik and Laura were an unholy, glued-together mess, their bodies positioned in ways that ensured humiliation and pain. I left no evidence behind, stuffing their clothes and my supplies into a bag and tossing it into a dumpster. A garbage truck's arrival was an unexpected bonus. I watched as it crushed the evidence. As I walked past a group of reporters near the hotel, I casually said, "Room 321. Doors open." The chaos that followed was everything I could have hoped for. Reporters scrambled, cameras in hand, and I slipped away unnoticed. I headed out of the hotel with their discarded clothes stuffed into a trash bag. On my way, I passed a group of homeless men huddled near the building. Without a second thought, I tossed the bag near them. The clothes were snatched up almost instantly, a convincing alibi forming in my mind. I found the clothes discarded in the bathroom and thought they could use them more than anyone else. After leaving the hotel, I sent Laura a quick text. "Where are you?" A few minutes passed without a response, so I called her phone, intending to leave a voicemail. Instead, a man answered. "Hello? Who's this?" I asked sharply. "I'm looking for Laura Tennyson." "Laura who?" he said, his voice indifferent. "Laura Tennyson," I repeated. "She's my wife." There was some muffled shouting in the background, followed by someone screaming. "Who's asking?" "I'm her husband," I said flatly. "Where are you?" The man's tone shifted. "Campaign worker, by the ballroom? Why don't you come up to room 321? Pronto." The line went dead. I moved briskly up the stairs, my pulse steady, but my mind racing. As I approached room 321, I could already hear the commotion. A crowd had gathered outside the door. Reporters, cameramen, and campaign staffers. Phones were out, flashes were going off, and snippets of conversation hinted at the chaos inside. The press secretary and campaign manager were banging on the sliding glass door of the balcony, locked out and desperate to break up the spectacle. But it was clear they were too late. Inside the room, the spectacle was grotesque. Laura and Henrik were still glued together, both nude, both humiliated. Laura's body was covered in bruises and bite marks. Henrik's pale, fleshy form slumped awkwardly against hers. I stepped closer, my voice dripping with disdain. "Hey, Laura, is that you under there? What are all those bite marks on your backside? Looks like you've been this guy's chew toy for a while." Laura groaned, her voice weak and pathetic. "Etan, I'm sorry. We can work this out." I scoffed. "Work this out? After you threw away 22 years of marriage to roll around with that?" I gestured toward Henrik. "You've got nothing to say that I care to hear." Henrik managed to mumble, "Get lost, jackass. She's better off with me." The temptation to end him right there was overwhelming. But I clenched my fists, letting the disgust and anger fuel my resolve instead of my fists. Laura's voice cracked as she tried again. "Ethan, please. I love you. I'll make it up to you." I laughed bitterly. "Love me? You've got a hell of a way of showing it. Henrik here biting you after every roll in the sheets doesn't exactly scream love. It screams cheap thrills, and you sold out our marriage for it." She sobbed, but I turned and walked toward the door. "I'm stepping out for a minute. If you think there's anything left worth saving, you can meet me out in the hallway." Her pitiful reply echoed behind me. "Ethan, I can't move." I didn't turn around. Outside the room, the reporters were buzzing with excitement. Questions flew at me, and I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. "Yes," I began, my voice loud and firm. "That's my wife in there. And yes, she's been carrying on an affair with Senator Henrik Blake. Bite marks glued the whole sordid mess. You saw it yourselves. That's who he is. A perverted, selfish coward who takes advantage of women like my wife." The crowd leaned in, phones and cameras capturing every word. "Oh, and if any of you have worked with Senator Blake, I'd recommend checking your wives and girlfriends for bite marks. Seems to be his calling card." Laughter rippled through the crowd as more reporters scrambled for details. The press secretary and campaign manager approached, their faces pale and panicked. "Mr. Tennyson," one began, "we need to ask you to leave. This is a private matter." I laughed coldly. "Private? You've got half the city's reporters in that room, and you're worried about privacy now." Security eventually escorted the crowd down to the first floor, where the press frenzy continued unabated. I slipped away, driving back to the motel and collapsing onto the bed. For the first time, the weight of it all hit me. 22 years of marriage gone. The illusion of a strong partnership shattered. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was the hospital. "Mr. Tennyson, your wife has been admitted to University Hospital." "Why does that matter?" I asked coldly. We need you to confirm her identity and provide insurance information. My voice hardened further. Is she on life support? Can I request you take her off it? The woman stammered. No, sir. She's not on life support. Fine. I'll be there soon. At the hospital, the media frenzy was still alive and well. Reporters swarmed the entrance, shouting questions as I walked past. One shoved a microphone in my face. Mr. Tennyson, what's going on? I stopped, turned to face the cameras and smirked. The hospital claims they have my wife. They won't let me see her, though. Funny how a senator gets to control access to the woman he was caught cheating with. Typical Washington corruption, huh? The cameras flashed as I pulled out one of the pictures James had given me. Oh, and for the record, here's Senator Blake, nude, with his bite mark obsession on full display. If your wife or girlfriend worked on his campaign, you might want to take a closer look. Hospital security stepped in then, ushering me inside. Inside, the scene was surreal. Laura and Henrik were glued together, their bodies slathered in some kind of gel as nurses worked to separate them. I looked at the hospital administrator. Have you made any progress? He shook his head. It could take days unless we opt for surgery. That would leave permanent scars. I smirked. Do whatever hurts the most. They've earned it. Laura's eyes locked onto mine. Ethan, please don't leave me. I leaned in close, my voice a venomous whisper. You gave me no choice. Enjoy the consequences of your decisions. I turned and walked away, leaving her sobs behind. This chapter of my life was over. I stepped out of the hospital room and into the hallway, the weight of the betrayal dulling the cacophony of reporters and staff around me. Just as I was about to leave, a police officer approached, his expression stern. Mr. Tennyson, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. The words blurred in my ears, but I didn't resist. Keeping my composure, I made my one phone call to Grant. His voice was calm and calculated as always. Answer every question with no comment, he instructed. I'll have you out of there in no time. Within 10 minutes, Grant arrived and had me released. By the time I returned to my motel room, I had already decided. I was done with Laura in every sense of the word. I gathered our belongings, checked out, and called Grant again. Start the divorce, I said flatly. Consider it done, he replied. My process server will wait until she's moved to her own room before serving the papers. The 4-hour drive home was interrupted by a call from Vanessa. Hey, next, she said, her tone playful. I just saw your 15 minutes of fame on the news. Want to talk? I sighed. Yeah, I could use the distraction. Dwelling on this mess might send me off the road. She chuckled. Well, if you need a laugh, they're playing that clip of your wife. You know, all over him. It's practically a comedy skit now. Yeah, I heard. The part about the clock transplant seems to be a fan favorite. I replied bitterly. Vanessa's voice softened. How do you recover from this? I hesitated for a moment. I don't. Not really. But sweeping you off your feet and living happily ever after sounds like a start. Her laugh was warm and inviting. Then get back here. There's a 2 a.m. flight to Vegas. Meet me at the airport. I paused, weighing her words. See you there. Yes, 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 she squealed. You're going to love the next couple of days. We talked for another hour until she had to pack. The thought of seeing her made the long drive bearable. At the airport, Vanessa's outfit stopped me in my tracks. She looked stunning, dressed provocatively in a way I'd never seen before. Like what you see, she teased, noticing my lingering gaze. I nodded. It definitely has possibilities. Her smile widened as she adjusted her flimsy skirt. Good, because you're stuck with me for the next few days. On the flight, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. Vanessa used her sweater as a makeshift blanket, shielding us from prying eyes as her fingers traced my thighs. I returned the favor, and by the time we landed, my mind was spinning with thoughts of her. The next 36 hours were a blur of passion, laughter, and indulgence. Vanessa and I couldn't get enough of each other. Every time I thought I was spent, she found a way to ignite the fire again. By the time we returned home, I was emotionally and physically drained, but I felt alive for the first time in months. The moment I turned my phone back on, it lit up with missed calls and messages. My kids had been trying to reach me, and they were understandably upset about my silence. I called them both and told them everything, the affair, the hospital, the divorce. They were angry, hurt, and confused, but they deserved the truth. One of the strangest calls was from a campaign worker. She explained that her boyfriend had bite marks on his backside, and she suspected Henrik was involved. "What should I do?" she asked. I handed her the attorney's card. "Call this guy. Ask for James. And don't be afraid to ask for financial help." She thanked me, and I hung up, satisfied that Henrik's downfall was continuing to snowball. By Monday, the fallout from Friday's fiasco was in full swing. Henrik's lead in the polls had vanished, and his opponent was relentless, airing brutal ads mocking the "Stick It to Washington" tagline. That night, the hospital called again. "Ethan, I'm in my own room now," Laura said weakly. "Can you come by and talk to me? I don't want a divorce." I didn't hesitate. "I'm sorry, Laura. I have a dinner date with my fiancé. Get well soon. I'll let the kids know about you." "What did you say?" "We're still married," she shouted. "Not for long," I replied, ending the call. Vanessa greeted me at her door with a playful smile, but her intentions were clear. Whatever plans I had for a conversation vanished the moment she pulled me into her arms. "What happened today?" I asked after we finally caught our breath. "I resigned," she said, her voice casual. "You what?" "I couldn't keep working under you, or over you, for that matter," she teased. "Besides, this gives us a chance to see if we're really meant for each other." Her logic was flawed, but I couldn't argue with the results. In the days that followed, Laura returned home from the hospital only to find I had already moved out. I had taken everything I cared about to Vanessa's place, leaving Laura to stew in her empty house. My kids convinced me to meet with her one last time, but I refused to step inside. When she invited me in, I stood firm. "If you want to talk, you'll join me on the porch," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. Her attempt to lure me back with a home-cooked meal and a pitiful demeanor failed miserably. She looked tired, disheveled, and pathetic, nothing like the woman I once loved. I didn't stay long. Laura had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Laura reluctantly stepped out onto the porch, her face a mix of desperation and pain. Her cheeks were slathered in some type of medical cream, and her hair was hidden beneath a scarf. Her loose, wrinkled clothes hung awkwardly on her frame, making her look more like a stranger than the woman I once married. I glanced at her hands, covered in latex gloves, and smirked coldly. "I hope those scars hurt as much as you claim. They won't come close to matching what you've done to my heart." "Ethan, please," she started, her voice trembling. "I promise I'll behave. I'll do anything to make this right." I crossed my arms, unmoved. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't leave right now." Her eyes filled with tears as she attempted to hug me, but I stepped back, my expression hardening. The pain in her eyes meant nothing. We sat down on the porch steps, several feet apart. "I don't want a divorce, Ethan," she said, her voice cracking. "It'll take time, but we can work this out. We've been together for 25 years, counting our courtship. That's not something you just throw away." I let out a bitter laugh. "You threw it away, not me. And for what? Tell me, Laura, what was it all for? Some cheap thrill? A moment of excitement? A man who bites you like some deranged dog? Help me understand." The tears started to fall as she choked out her words. "I can't begin to express how sorry I am. I got swept up in the excitement of it all, but I know that's just an excuse. What I did was inexcusable, but I'm begging you, Ethan. Give me another chance." I shook my head, my voice colder than ever. "Not going to happen, Laura. Everyone who knows me now knows exactly what you are. They know you were nothing more than Stickler's plaything, and they know I meant nothing to you." I refused to subject myself to their pity and ridicule. She sobbed harder, but I pressed on. "I intend to live with, and probably marry, Vanessa. Just so you know, we've been having sex nonstop since the day you glued yourself to Stickler. It's the first time I've broken my wedding vows, but I figure it's fair considering how long you've been at this." Her face twisted in anguish. "The kids think you're the bad guy. We could have worked this out if you'd given me the chance. You still here, unflinching. You believe whatever you need to believe, Laura. What we had meant nothing to you, and I don't feel guilty in the slightest. I was discarded, not you. This is the life you chose, and now you'll live with the consequences." She wiped her face angrily. I'll fight you in court, Ethan. This is wrong. I stood up, brushing off my jeans. Have your lawyer work with mine. Tell Vanessa you hate her if it makes you feel better. She doesn't care what you think. She has the man of her dreams now. And I finally have someone who appreciates me. Goodbye, Laura. Epilogue. Stickler's campaign imploded a few days later. His wife filed for divorce, citing infidelity and naming Laura in the proceedings. She was called to testify, a humiliating spectacle that made her the target of constant harassment. Some of it sexually charged, some blaming her for Stickler's downfall. Unable to handle the pressure, Laura moved into a small apartment. We sold the house and split the proceeds, though I made sure she knew she was getting the lesser end of the deal. All her Facebook pictures vanished, replaced by generic close-ups of her face. If there were even any pictures at all. The police had me in their sights for a while, but no charges were ever filed. They had no evidence tying me to what happened in room 321. I stuck to my story, claiming I'd been in the men's room for an extended personal moment. It wasn't far from the truth. The divorce dragged on for a year. Laura seemed intent on stretching it out, likely hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't. Vanessa and I moved in together, and she excelled at my old job. I found new work as a project manager, and we settled into a life far removed from the chaos Laura had brought into mine. 2 years later, I received an unmarked envelope containing an erectile dysfunction report for Henrik Stickler. Apparently, he hadn't been able to perform since the incident. The pain in his genitals was so severe it canceled any arousal. The prognosis wasn't good, and none of the proposed treatments had worked. They suggested he give it time. I smiled every time I thought of it. Vanessa and I recently celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. Laura, now on her 4th husband, occasionally surfaces at family events like weddings or the births of grandchildren. Every time, without fail, she mutters the same thing. We could have worked it out, Ethan. And every time, I reply the same way. No, Laura, we couldn't.